For centuries, people have tried to predict exactly when the world would end. But one of the oldest and most famous stories takes us back more than 1,000 years to medieval Europe. As the year 1000 approached, some believed that humanity was reaching a terrifying deadline. 1,000 years had passed since the birth of Christ. And according to one interpretation of the book of Revelation, Satan would be released after 1,000 years. For those who believed it, the meaning seemed terrifyingly clear. The end was near. According to stories that would later spread, fear swept across Europe. People abandoned their possessions. Some gave their wealth to the church. Others gathered in religious centers, waiting for the final judgment. Every war, every famine, every strange event in the sky could be interpreted as another sign. And then, the final night of the year arrived. December 31st, 999. People waited. Midnight approached. The year 1000 began. And nothing happened. The sun rose as it always had. Life continued. But there is a problem with this story. Modern historians have found little evidence that Europe actually experienced a massive, widespread panic around the year 1000. Many ordinary people at the time may not have even known exactly what year it was. The dramatic image of entire populations waiting for the apocalypse appears to have been exaggerated by writers and historians centuries later. So perhaps the first great apocalypse panic of the last millennium wasn't really an apocalypse panic at all. It may have been something even more revealing. A story created by later generations. Because humans have always been fascinated by the idea that someone before them believed they were living at the end of the world. But centuries later, another prediction would convince thousands of people that they knew exactly when the end would come. In the early 19th century, an American farmer and Baptist preacher named William Miller began studying the Bible in extraordinary detail. He became especially interested in a mysterious prophecy found in the book of Daniel. Miller believed that the numbers hidden within the text could be used to calculate the moment when Christ would return to earth. After years of calculations, he reached an extraordinary conclusion. The second coming was approaching. At first, Miller predicted that it would happen sometime between 1843 and 1844. The message spread quickly. Newspapers printed his predictions. Preachers carried the warning from town to town. And thousands of people began preparing for what they believed would be the final days of human history. When the first predicted period passed, and nothing happened, the calculation was revised. A new date was announced. October 22nd. This time, many believers were convinced. As the day approached, some reportedly abandoned their work. Others gathered together in homes, churches, and open fields. They prayed. They waited. And they watched the sky. Hours passed. Night arrived. Then midnight. October 22nd ended. And once again, the world continued exactly as before. For thousands of believers, the emotional impact was devastating. The event became known as the Great Disappointment. Some abandoned the movement entirely. Others searched for an explanation for why the prophecy had failed. But the failure of the prediction did not completely destroy the movement. Instead, new interpretations emerged. And from the aftermath, new religious movements would eventually develop. The world had not ended. But for those who had spent months, perhaps years, believing that October 22nd would be humanity's final day, something had ended. Their certainty. More than 60 years later, the next apocalypse would not come from religion. This time, it would come from the sky. In 1910, Halley's Comet was returning. For centuries, humans had looked at comets with fear. They had been seen as warnings of war, disease, and disaster. But by the early 20th century, science had transformed our understanding of these mysterious objects. Astronomers knew Halley's Comet was not a supernatural warning. They could calculate its orbit. They knew when it would arrive. And they knew something extraordinary was about to happen. Earth was expected to pass through the comet's enormous tail. Then scientists made a discovery. That newspapers around the world would turn into something terrifying. Astronomers detected cyanogen gas in the comet's tail. A poisonous gas. Suddenly, a spectacular astronomical event became a possible apocalypse. Newspapers published frightening headlines. Rumors spread that the comet's poisonous gases could enter Earth's atmosphere. Some feared humanity might suffocate. Others imagined the entire planet being poisoned. And soon, people began selling solutions. Gas masks, bottled oxygen, so-called anti-comet pills. Anything that promised protection from a threat millions of kilometers away. As May 18, 1910 approached, millions looked toward the sky. Some with excitement, others with genuine fear. That night, Earth passed through the region of space associated with Halley's tail. People waited for the poison. They waited for disaster. They waited for the end. But morning came. The atmosphere remained breathable. The planet was still here. And Halley's comet continued silently on its journey through space. The world had survived another predicted apocalypse. But this time, the panic revealed something new. Science had explained the comet. Yet fear had transformed that science into another story about the end of the world. Nearly 90 years later, the next predicted catastrophe would not come from the sky. It would come from something humanity had created. Computers. As the year 2000 approached, a strange problem began attracting attention around the world. For decades, many computer systems had stored years using only 2 digits. 1998 became 98. 1999 became 99. But when the clock reached the year 2000, the number would become. And some computers might interpret that not as the year 2000, but as 1900. It sounded like a tiny mistake. Just 2 missing digits. But by the end of the 20th century, computers controlled an enormous part of modern civilization. Banks, power grids, government systems, air traffic, communication networks. And suddenly, people began asking a terrifying question. What would happen if all of them failed at the same time? The media imagined catastrophic scenarios. Bank accounts could disappear. Power grids could collapse. Planes could fall from the sky. Some feared that modern civilization itself might simply stop working at midnight. Governments and companies around the world began preparing. Programmers worked through millions of lines of code, searching for systems vulnerable to the Y2K bug. Billions of dollars were spent testing, repairing, and replacing computer systems. Meanwhile, public anxiety continued to grow. Some people stockpiled food, water, cash, and emergency supplies. Then, December 31st, 1999 arrived. Across the planet, millions gathered to celebrate the beginning of a new millennium. But behind the fireworks, engineers, government officials, and computer experts were watching their screens, waiting. The final seconds disappeared. 3, 2, 1. Midnight. The year 2000 began. And the global catastrophe never came. There were some minor technical problems. But the banks remained open. The power stayed on. Planes remained in the sky. The world continued. To many people, Y2K became remembered as a massive overreaction. A panic over a disaster that never existed. But that may not be the full story. Because unlike many failed apocalypse predictions, Y2K was based on a real technical problem. And perhaps the reason nothing catastrophic happened was not because the danger had been imaginary, but because thousands of people had spent years making sure it never happened. 4 predictions, 4 different fears. And every time, the world survived. But humanity wasn't finished predicting the end. Because the most famous doomsday predictions were still to come. Subscribe to Atrox and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like. See you in part 2.